Now you can say, as you're breathing, you're doing this, and as you're doing that, you'll remember the memory, and you'll feel good, and the more you feel good, the more powerful it gets, and you don't even have to remember not feeling good to think about that, so you memorize the feelings of good feelings that you're having right now. So you can go down the confusion language, as I've gone into a little bit there. You can go down the pure associational language. You can use all the language models that you already know to achieve a very specific outcome. But now this language has a purpose. It has a very specific purpose, and when you've achieved that purpose, you move on, because there's no point staying there anymore. So you're no longer shooting a machine gun, hoping that one of the bullets will hit the place you're going for. You're more like a sniper, with each bullet being precisely placed in the place you need it to go. And when you've achieved that, you move on to the next target, and the next target, and the next target, until one by one, all your ducks are lined up in a row and shot down, and you achieve exactly where you come from. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yes, it does, thank you.
No problem. Does anyone else have any questions or comments to make before we wrap up for today?
Just one more from me, Igor.
Okay.
Briefly, you mentioned the importance of self-esteem and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go away and refine our habits and develop a very good generic self-esteem power loop, you'd say that would be akin to ego strengthening routines and the importance of ego strengthening routines in therapy, at least?
Absolutely. Although I make a slight distinction between what ego strengthening and self-esteem. That's a bigger point we can talk about another time if you like. And I prefer to strengthen self-esteem rather than the ego. But that's a philosophical point which I will have to address at a different point. It is exactly that. The main difference between the traditional ego-boosting suggestions and what you're doing here is, in ego-boosting suggestions, you basically have a set text. It's basically learn a script. And the script is actually either a mini loop or a power loop already pre-created for you. And that's fantastic. And some of them are really good. The big difference between that and what you're learning to do here is now you're learning to become self-reliant. You're learning to create these things for yourself. And of course, later on, we're going to go through a whole list of different power loops that you must have mastered in order to master hypnosis. If you don't have all these different power loops in place, you can get stuck. Self-esteem is not the only power loop you need to be able to master. The second thing is that, again, in more traditional circles, they'll give you one solution. Okay? Maybe two. If you have two solutions, you still have a dilemma. So what you're learning to do here is to create power loops on the fly. Because once you've created, think of this. Let's say you take each of the 6 or 7 different power loops that we've discussed. The feel good anytime, the bad memory to good memory, the rework a bad memory to get the lessons from them, the remember who you really are and be true to yourself. These are all different ways of building self-esteem, right? Now let's say you have all those 6 things done and dusted. Now you have choice, because you can throw any of those in, and not only can you throw any of those in so that you have more choice in terms of how to build self-esteem, you can throw them back to back to reinforce each other, for example. But you also, because of the way you went about constructing them, you can run the same power loop 10 times in a row, and it sounds completely different each time, because you're creating new language each time to fit each of the stepping stones. Does that make sense? Just like you just found out just now, to create your mini loop for example, creating a safe place, you came up with 4 examples in literally 10 seconds on how you could create that mini loop. The first example was, create a safe space outside your mind. The second example was, remember a time that you felt safe, and now create a safe space out of that. The third one was, imagine this ideal place of relaxation which can be safe and all the rest of it. These all achieve exactly the same outcome, and you came up totally on the fly. So now you have choice, because you seem to create from the outside world totally spontaneous things which seem like new language, new stuff each time, etc. But what people aren't seeing is the pattern that you're running over and over and over again. And because those patterns are already inside your mind, it becomes really easy for you to navigate, if you like, through the hypnotic constructs that you're creating without having to think too much about those things, so that all your energy can be focusing on the client, focusing on creating better language for the situation, reading the signals to make sure you hit the waypoints you want to come, deciding whether you need to throw another mini loop in between 2 loops because it'll transition easier for this particular person. These are all strategic decisions you can make on the fly, because you now have the brain power left over to make strategic decisions, rather than hoping for the best that what you're about to regurgitate is going to work. Do you see the difference between what on the surface looks very similar, but underneath it, because of the way you've gone about constructing it, is very different? So you're not stuck with someone else's script, you are now free to create your own on the fly each time, fresh, new, vibrant, and still have the same power and impact that masterful hypnotists have had over the ages. Does that answer your question, Paul?
Yes, it does, thanks.
No problem at all. Anyone else? Any more? Right, in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you your task for between now and the next session. Your task is very simple. You've heard during this session how simple it is to create a power loop. You've had an example of a power loop being created pretty much from scratch, and how simple it is to do. Now, that's the inspiration. You know what the background is. You know the patterns you're trying to achieve, and that's your 1% of inspiration there and there. But unless you do them, unless you go through the process you heard Paul go through, you heard Sean beginning to go through earlier on, unless you do that and go through that mechanical process over and over and over again to really facilitate your brain to think in these ways, you'll be just as stuck in the level of amateur or wherever you happen to be at the moment as you were before, because that knowledge isn't enough. You must create the habits. A tennis player is not a great tennis player because he knows about where to stand on the field and the different strategies he can do in terms of how to play a tennis game. A tennis player becomes great because he does his forehand, his backhand over and over and over again. He spends hours doing the simple basics so that when he needs them, he has them ready to hand. And that's what you need to do now. And that is, I want you to begin to develop process instructions. Literally dozens, if not hundreds, of process instructions. So you get used to developing process instructions totally on the fly. Remember, a simple suggestion is you feel more confident. A process instruction will be as you breathe in confidence. Or it would be, because you felt confident in the past, you can feel confident in the future. That's a pseudologic. Or your neurology is capable of a lot of different emotional states. Confidence is one of them. And because you're capable of feeling confident, I want you to practice feeling more and more confident as time goes by. That's going to be a more logical set of suggestions. It doesn't matter which ones it is. The point is, you're getting familiar with using all the different styles of suggestions, putting together into processes aimed at self-esteem. Once you have that, that's your raw data, your raw material, it's easy to pack it into little mini loops, which become your stepping stones to create your power loops. That bit's totally easy. But what I want you to do right now is spend the next week writing between 50 and maybe 100 different process instructions designed purely to develop self-esteem. They can be random, pseudological, or logical processes. I don't care which they are. In fact, I'd recommend that you use all three intermixed. But develop them. Get used to writing them. Write them out by hand just to get into that process. If you then want to, tie several of those together to create a little mini loop, a stepping stone if you like. That's fine. That's good. That's actually a very useful step to do. But you don't need to. The main thing right now to work on is get used to creating more and more process instructions that have a specific outcome, in this sense, self-esteem. Does this make sense to everyone?
Yep. Yeah, it's okay. I'm okay with you, thanks.
Excellent. We're going to finish up now. So thank you again very much for taking part of this session today and paying attention to this. And go back over the audio recording for today's sessions if you need to think about the structures and lay it all out. It's a very simple system, but it's really powerful. It's one of the major milestones that I went through to go from not having a clue what I was doing to being confident that I always knew what I was doing and where I needed to go with things. So I can't emphasize enough how important this phase in your progression is. With that in mind, I'd like to thank all of you for spending yet another wonderful Sunday with me, and I look forward to seeing you promptly at the same time, the same place, on the next session. Thanks again, guys. Bye-bye.